going through 22 gosh dang things that I'm breaking the rules in, or something like that. Number one is protein intake. I've never tracked my protein, and I think the general gram of protein per pound of body weight is extremely overrated. This is based on my own experience. When I first got into the gym and I was a young whippersnapper, I was scoffing down all the protein that I could get my hands on. Okay, that doesn't sound good. Oh shit. I was eating a lot of meat. That doesn't sound good either. I was ingesting large amounts of protein into my body because I wanted to get bigger muscles, okay? Don't get it twisted. And, dry chicken breasts, endless protein shakes, kind of bloating myself. I was a bit more of like an ectomorph hard gainer, especially in my younger years. So the more I could eat, the better. And then I got sick with mono, and I went on this crazy diet where it's just like an elimination diet where I wasn't emphasizing protein, and I just didn't really notice any difference in my ability to train. And then ever since then, I just sort of gave myself permission to be like, I don't think being protein obsessed leads to more muscle gain. And that's how I've lived ever since. And for better or worse, a lot of my training is based off of perceived effects that I can see, changes in my body that I can tangibly observe. And I've never noticed a tangible difference from maximizing your protein intake to just eating healthy whole foods, and making a slight effort to include some protein in the meals, being like slightly protein aware, but not protein obsessed. I think that helps a lot. And especially if you're prioritizing protein and sacrificing carbs. I've had clients I've worked with where I'm like, let's just, for a moment, hypothetically entertain the idea that protein is overrated. Oh no, I need my 200 grams of protein a day. No, just let's do it as an experiment. And we're gonna add a few more carbs in instead. And you're just gonna consume 140 grams of protein or something. And almost always they're like, wow, I feel better, I have more energy, and I'm noticing no difference in my ability to build muscle. So I think it's overrated. I think a large part of the reason is that it's been really effective marketing by protein powder supplement companies, because if you got to get 200 grams of protein in a day, how the fuck are you going to do that eating chicken breasts and meat? It's going to be tough consistently. So you buy a protein powder, you throw 2-3 shakes in there, then you can make it happen. That's my conspiratorial take. But for you, I suggest just de-emphasizing it a little. If you're like protein obsessed and it's inconveniencing you and it's costing a lot, just take a breather and just go, you know what, maybe Matt's right, let me try it. Try it. And if you notice a difference, fair enough. If you notice a negative difference from decreasing your protein, then you can go back, but at least give it a try. Give yourself the permission that I don't need to be obsessed with protein, and I'm just going to focus on eating healthy whole foods, and I'm going to be able to build muscle just the same. Just try that on for size, and if it fits, thank me later. If it doesn't, you can go back to scoffing down 9 chicken breasts a day. Number 2, static stretching before training. A lot of people are against this. A little quick sip here to keep me going. Comment down below what your favorite beer is. This is mine in the summer on the beach. To me, in my opinion, controversial take. Kronenbourg 1664 Blanc. Kronenbourg Blanc. It's got a slight fruity hint to it. Is the best beach beer. Tell me I'm wrong. But yeah, comment down below your favorite beers. I like stouts. I'm from Canada. I'm in Florida right now, but there's a handful of beers up in Canada. Phillips Brewery on the West Coast in Victoria makes a lot of good beers. Electric Unicorn, if you're in Canada. Hoyne Dark Matter, that's another beaut. Anyways, just like that, I'm just shit talking about beers. Let's get back into fitness tips, eh? Static stretching before training. So a lot of people think this is not what you should do, and the thought process behind that is that it's not a good way to warm up and prime your body to do intense exercise. And I agree with that logic. However, I think if you have some issues in your body, which I've got a lot, that static stretching to release some of the tension in areas that are chronically tight is a good temporary solution to allow you more range of motion, more mobility through that area, so that when you do go to train, you can access a fuller range of motion and not compound the muscle imbalance. For example, I've got a lot of tension in my pecs, okay, and anything where I like really contract them, specifically the left shoulder, if you're familiar with the channel, the pec minor is a serious problem. My left collarbone's sitting about an inch higher than the right. So if I do anything that really shortens that, it pulls that shoulder further out of position, and then the scapula is getting downwardly rotated and retracted, sitting closer to my spine than it should naturally, and I start to get numbness and tingling up into the side of my face and my head and in here. And I've found that doing things like hanging movements helps to release a lot of the tension in the pec minor, or muscles that are going to pull your scapula down, downwardly rotate and depress it. And so I'll do a bunch of hanging exercises directly over above, and then a bar kind of at eye height. I'm dropping my chest down, along with massage and mobility, like dynamic movements, to try to create some release in this area that's chronically tight and sitting out of, creating the joint to be sitting out of position. So then when I go train, I can get my shoulder into a better position and put a stretch tension on the pecs with the overhead dumbbell tricep extension and not really exacerbate the issue. So that's just an example. If you have tight hip flexors, for example, which I've also got, and I use the psoas. If you're not familiar, you should look up the psoas. It really gets into the psoas if that's a problem muscle for you. Give that a goog. It's spelled Psoarite, I think, like the psoas, psoas. Just a little piece of plastic that you lay on that releases your psoas. But if you have chronically tight hip flexors, and then you're going in there to train legs, and you can't really access a proper range of motion, I think doing some stretching or some massage to release those muscles, to try to gain a little bit more length, so that you can then execute the movement with a closer to ideal range of motion. That being said, I don't think static stretching is like the perfect thing to do right before you do an intense working set. I think if you have issues and you want to work with them through static stretching, massage, and mobility, you should do that first, and then you should do some warm-up sets with light weight. That's a better way to prime your body to train. I think that's where people get conflated. I think if you do it in that order and you're using it to try to alleviate some issues that you have, it's useful. If you have phenomenal biomechanics, meaning you move perfectly and you don't have any muscle imbalance issues, then going and doing a bunch of static stretching before training is not necessary. And you should do some dynamic exercises where you're moving the body, and then some light warm-up sets before you hit your working sets with your heavier weight and higher intensity. So I think static stretching before training can be useful in that context. Number 3, excessive warm-up sets. I use an excessive amount of warm-up sets. So for my triceps, for example, the dumbbell tricep extension overhead, my go-to moneymaker, pretty much the only tricep exercise I can execute without exacerbating my muscle imbalance issues. I can also do it with cables. And recently we started adding, I think it's basically the same movement. I'm doing, we start with the 55, 65, 75, 85, 95, 100. I'm doing at least 5 warm-up sets after I've done my stretching and mobility for like an hour to loosen everything up, try to get my shoulders into a good position where they're not pulled into an imbalanced spot, and then executing the movement with the right cues to kind of emphasize the stretch on those problem muscles, my rhomboids, my pec minor, all these things that are pulling that scapula down and retracting it closer to the spine. I'm going to do 5 to 6 warm-up sets with lighter weight. So the first set is with the 55-pound dumbbell, and I'm just focusing on my cues, checking out my shoulders, checking out my elbows to make sure that things feel good. Sometimes they don't feel good, and the warm-up sets allow me to work through those issues. So the first set with the 55, I'm just doing like 4 to 6 reps, and I'm going slow, and I'm holding it at the bottom, and I'm focusing on scooping my elbows in and dropping my shoulders down, and I'm kind of assessing like, where am I tight? Where are things not sitting in the right position? Do I need to do more stretching and mobility to loosen up a problem area before I go blitzkrieg with a 115-pound dumbbell behind my head? And I think it's played a huge role in my ability to train through the issues that I have and remain largely injury-free. I think also it allows you to kind of ramp up your nervous system and adopt a mentality where you're revving yourself up to train really intensely. Whereas if you just are on the treadmill for 5 minutes and then you jump into your first working set for bench press, you're not going to bring that like animalistic intensity that I think is extremely useful for producing more growth. So I think this extended warm-up set period, although it can be kind of tedious, allows you to screen for potential like injury risks and make sure that all your joints are feeling good and work through that with lighter weight, not at a high intensity. And also it allows you to kind of ramp up so that when you hit that working set, like you're chomping at the bit and all your joints are feeling good and you're slowly revved up your system so that you're ready to mercilessly attack it like a beast. So to be more specific, 55-pound dumbbell overhead, 4 to 6 reps, and I do a bunch of arm circles, arm swings, stretch out my wrists, a whole bunch of kind of active mobility for my shoulders. I like to raise my arms up overhead and take big deep breaths into my traps and upper back and just do all these different variations of arm swings. I'll hang off of a piece of equipment again. People are looking at me like, what is this whack job doing? I'm loosening up my rickety machine, all right? You know, with this whole rickety bag of bones here, we're trying to loosen her up to do some freaking crazy shit. And then we go up to the 65. I'm probably resting like 1 to 2 minutes in between each set. You don't want to fatigue yourself at all. You're just priming. 65-pound dumbbell, 4 to 6 reps. Same thing, 75, 85, 95, 105. And then I'll do my first working set. Lately, I've been doing it with the 105. And we're getting 18 reps at the moment. So excessive warm-up sets. I'll do the same thing for biceps, a few less. Biceps, there's less that can really go wrong for me personally, but I'm still doing 2 to 3 warm-up sets, building up to that working weight, which I think you should do. Number 4, training the same muscle multiple days in a row. People do not like this one. I am guilty of overtraining. Guilty as charged. Specifically training arms multiple days in a row. I think, particularly because they're a smaller muscle group, that you can get away with this without incurring systemic fatigue, meaning fatigue on your nervous system, kind of wearing yourself down, potentially depleting your immune system, your overall metabolic energistic system, to use some very official scientific words. That can be a concern, and I think that's what leads to overtraining. But the muscles themselves, particularly with the arms in my experience, are very resilient to withstand continual stimulus if you ramp up to it. I don't really know what would happen if you didn't work out at all and then you just started training arms every day, because I never did that. But if you progressively, train your arms once a week for the first 6 months, and then the next 6 months you start training them twice a week, and then, you're a year in at this point, maybe 6 months later, a year and a half in, you start training them 3 times a week. And then, 2 years in, you start training them every second day. That's kind of like what I saw, although it was more spread out, but like something like that. My arm growth actually was positive from doing that. And it's controversial. But that's something I've noticed to be very effective. And right now I'm training arms 3 days in a row, which sounds crazy, and I'm not saying that you should do that, but I think it does show that the muscles are more resilient than you think. And when you're thinking about overtraining, it should be more a matter of, am I incurring too much systemic fatigue with which my whole body cannot recuperate from, and I'm slowly depleting myself. I've seen that to be very real. rather than the actual muscle itself just simply not benefiting from more stimulus. There is, I'm sure, an upper limit to the amount of stimulus that even the smaller muscles, the biceps and triceps, could positively benefit from, but in my experience it seems way further down the road than most people are perceiving it to be. So food for thought, higher training frequency, I've seen it to be quite beneficial. And just simply deciding to break that rule, I think allowed me to make a lot more progress than I would ever have made as I've gotten more advanced. And a small caveat there is that if you are going to train more often, I think it's worth considering bringing down the individual workout volume a little bit. So, if you've been training your arms twice a week and you do 8 sets for biceps and 8 sets for triceps, should be supersetted, so just 8 rounds of a superset, which is I think a good amount of volume if you're training your arms twice a week. Then if you're going to train every other day, which is going to equate out to training arms 3.5 times a week, you shouldn't continue to do 8 sets per muscle in each session, because then I think you're starting to affect your whole body's ability to recover from the amount of work that you're doing. And the benefit of higher frequency might be diluted by incurring additional fatigue and not allowing yourself to fully recover. Not the muscle individually so much as just your whole body. You're going to end up getting really tired and worn out, and your immune system's going to be compromised, and you're just simply putting too much stress on your body, especially if you're training to failure all the time, which I think you should, and you're going to train at a high frequency and do a moderate to high amount of volume. In my experience, it's just too much, and it works in the short term, but then the fatigue compounds. It's like the first week in, you're like, wow, I'm doing all this extra work and my body's handling it, I'm getting bigger. But then the second weekend, it's like, oh, it seems to be slowly working, but I'm a little tired. And the third weekend, you're like, oh my God, I'm starting to dread my workouts. And the fourth weekend, you're like, holy shit, I'm so tired. Because the fatigue kind of is compounding one week after the next. So if you're gonna break the rule of, training a muscle more often than is typically recommended, you should keep in mind the total amount of volume you're doing and potentially shrink that down. So in this context, if you were to train your arms every second day, just as an example, I'm not saying for sure that you should do that. Instead of doing 8 rounds in each workout, I would just do 4. Just roughly speaking. It's not my exact recommendation, but cut that in half so that your frequency is higher. I think there is benefit from hitting it with a higher frequency, but you're not increasing the total volume so much that your body just simply can't recover. Number 5, always train to failure and beyond. Quick sip of the brewski. A lot of people may not agree with this, and I'm not going to concretely say that they're wrong. I think part of this is temperament as a person. I can acknowledge that there could be some benefit in not always going completely, max out psychotic. But I simply can't get motivated to go into the gym and train and not push my limits. It's just boring to me. So that could be a drawback. There could be some benefit in not always training. I've experimented with it, but not extensively. Because every time I've tried it, I'm like, I hate this. I just can't get up for it. I'm like, why don't I just take another day off and then murder myself the next day in the gym? So part of your training style is going to be produced by your temperament and your likes and dislikes. And that doesn't mean that, my preference to train to failure and beyond meaning once you hit normal range of motion failure and that you can't complete another rep with full range of motion, that you go down to partial range of motion. You continue to do reps at a smaller and smaller range of motion, little choters, as some call it. Or you complete that set at full range of motion and then you immediately do a drop set wherein you lower the weight a little bit and do more reps, and then you could do additional more than one drop set. You could do 3, 4, 5 drop sets. You could do assisted negatives if you're doing a single arm dumbbell curl until you can't complete another full range of motion. You use your other hand to bring the weight up and then you control the negative down because you're always going to be stronger in the lowering phase of a movement. Bicep curl is a good example. You can't get the weight up again, but you could still lower it with some control. So you use your opposite hand to do some assisted negatives, going beyond regular full range of motion failure. Those are all things that would allow you to train beyond failure. And overall, I think the pros outweigh the cons. So if you teach yourself to always push your limits no matter how you feel, there could be some drawbacks, but I think the benefit of adopting that habitual practice and mentality outweighs some of the drawbacks. And I think that it can become a pretty deep groove that you develop in your mind wherein you can't really not do that. And it kind of puts you into this constant state of attack mode. And I think disproportionately to anything else, that's going to produce more benefit for your long-term muscle growth than any of these other. Potentially leaving some reps in reserve is beneficial. With that, I think inevitably there's also going to be additional mentality things like settling to not push yourself, or settling to just take days off, or settling for all these things where if you really want to push for more growth, that mentality simply isn't going to be the best thing to do. It may make you feel more comfortable, but an attack mode, push my limits, stay out of my comfort zone, constantly willing to subject myself to short-term physical pain and discomfort, I think is the most beneficial mentality to continue to see growth. And I think that's what has allowed me to continue to see growth in my later years as a natural lifter, only training arms and legs. Is simply that I like approaching my training like that. And I like having an outlet where I can go, this is testing me physically. And I like the pain. And I like that I'm against, some resistance, and that I have to do all this mobility. I can only do these exercises, and it's getting more and more difficult to make gains. That fires me up to resist against that challenge and unleash the beast. I think that will produce more long-term benefit than potentially some of the short-term benefits of not always training to failure, in my opinion. Number 6, exercise selection is overrated. If you're familiar with my channel, you know that this is a firm belief of mine, and it's something that is so popular within the fitness content space. The majority of the content, I would say, is focused on exercise selection. Got a good neck crack there. Wow. That's probably the most popular thing to talk about, is different exercises and which exercise hits this and that, and which are the best exercises, these tier list rankings of exercise. Although it's a factor, I think it's massively overstated. I think that the way that you do any given exercise is what's going to produce growth, more than is this exercise technically, fundamentally better than another one because it emphasizes the stretch or the strength curve, power curve, and all these big fancy words people use to break down movements and nitpick which ones are better than others. I'm an extreme case. I've only done behind the head tricep extensions for 3-4 years now, that one movement. And if you contrast that to a lot of the content telling you need to isolate all the individual heads of the triceps and split up your volume between your lateral and long hands, my hope is that it is a real world example of proof that that stuff's just being overstated. And not that you can't mix in a few different movements, but the intensity, the frequency, the volume, the overall amount of weight that you move, how you progress that stimulus by adding more reps, adding intensity techniques, increasing your frequency, maybe upping your volume, finding ways to push yourself harder, develop your mind-muscle connection more, change the types of tempo you use to emphasize the stretch with the slower tempo, to use a faster tempo to try to just horse cock some weight, to really push some weight around. We got to take a quick break here. Memory card's full. Okay, we're back. Exercise selection being overrated. I think the most practical way for you to apply that is to structure the beginning of your sessions with consistent movements so that you can track your progress better and not getting distracted with doing a million different exercises and limiting your ability to track your progress. And then at the end of your workout or the second half of your workout, giving yourself the freedom to experiment with different movements if you need that, so that you can keep some variety in your training and keep your training interesting so you don't get bored of it. I think that's the best way to apply it, because there's a trade-off. If you get too caught into trying to optimize your exercise selection and you're doing so many different movements because you think you need to isolate the muscle from all these different angles, you're going to miss out. You limit your ability to progress because you're not being consistent enough with the movements to track from session to session and then week to week, month to month, year to year. But you might get bored if you just do one movement or two movements all the time for one muscle group. So start the session with the same movements for at least a couple months, focus on progressive overload, track what you're doing, use an extended rest time, try to chase reps and weight. And then the second part of your workout, change. You can do different exercises. You can have a little bit more free reign and randomness if you need that. That's what I think the practical application is. Number 7, bulking is unnecessary given that you're greater than or equal to 10% body fat. I think if you're less than 10% body fat, you're potentially in a depleted state where it's going to be more difficult to add muscle mass and have decent energy. I think that if you're over 10%, roughly speaking, that, if you're already 13% body fat, do you need to go up to 20% body fat to gain muscle? I don't think so. And I think the benefit of it is overstated. That being said, if you don't care at all about your body composition, then it could be worth the small amount of benefit to add additional fat. But most people do care about their body composition. And I think you're better off, if you're already 13% body fat, to focus on other things, that being your training structure or your lifestyle. So your consistency with training, your intensity with training, your ability to progress your training in some way, shape, or form. Those are your 3 foundational factors within the gym. Outside of the gym, your lifestyle, how much stress are you incurring? How much sleep are you getting? Do you have any additional habits that impede your progress? Drinking excessive amounts of alcohol, engaged in a really busy, stressful lifestyle where you don't sleep enough. Things like that are going to limit your progress more than whether or not you're in an excessive calorie surplus. And for me, the majority of my journey, I've been in this 10 to 15% body fat range. More recently, I've had some struggles staying. I think I've probably gone above the 15% body. I don't really know. I'm somewhere around there. I might have popped up to 16 or 17%, but not on purpose and not by preference, just from a lack of ability to discipline my nutrition, my caloric intake. And as I've gotten older, being 32 now, the habits that allowed me to stay in the 10 to 15% body fat range are no longer effective because my metabolism has slowed down more. So when I was 27 even, I could have the same nutritional habits I have now and have no issue staying at 12% body fat. Whereas now that exact same kind of nutritional habits and lifestyle leads to 16% body fat. And so it's just been a challenge learning to change my nutritional habits, adjusting to my slowing down metabolism. Number 9, you can't overtrain a muscle, but can overtrain your CNS, immune system, etc. I already talked about this a little bit in training the same muscle multiple days in a row. You probably can overtrain a muscle, but I think it's massively misrepresented how difficult it is to actually overtrain the muscle itself, given that you kind of build up to it and that you slowly kind of step by step add more frequency, add more volume, add more weight, add more intensity. The muscle itself, I've seen, to be very resilient and adaptable in recovering to increased stimulus. However, your body's ability to recover from increased stimulus seems less adaptable. And so as you increase the amount of work and stress and demand that you put on the muscle, in a lot of ways, you're encouraging that muscle to respond by growing in size and growing in strength. But if that demand becomes so extreme that your overall body's ability to recover from the work being done starts to deteriorate because you're simply putting too much stimulus on it, that's where overtraining happens. And I've experienced that, where you start to notice a lack of strength and muscle gain progression, and chronic fatigue building up, susceptibility to getting sick, super prone to like little tweaks and twinges. Like your body just starts to deteriorate a bit. And I think it's an important distinction though, that to me it's not so much the muscle itself, it's your whole body's ability to recover from that amount of work. Obviously the muscles do still have limits. I'm not saying they don't. But that limit is much further down the line than most people think, in my opinion. I've just seen that to be the case, wherein, my triceps are sore, but let me try training. I got a great workout still. Like in my mind previously, I was like, that's physically impossible. The muscle's like recovering, so it's not going to be productive. You're not going to be stronger. But on an individual, like case by case basis, so long as I haven't started to dip into my like systemic energy stores, the muscle itself seems very adaptable and recovering from more and more work, given that you kind of work up to it progressively. I've never really gone from like 0 to 100. All of these things in like increased frequency, increased volume, increased training intensity are like progressively being added as I run into plateaus and I'm looking for more things to lead to growth. So I don't think you should like look for a specific prescription right off the bat of like, this is the amount of volume, this is the amount of frequency, this is whatever. I think you should start with a smaller amount. If you're just starting out, train each muscle once a week, 5 sets, 2 failure or close in the beginning, and you will see growth. And just keep doing that and just keep showing up consistently. That'll be enough. But then once you run into a plateau, then up the ante. So you're deciding what your exercise prescription is in terms of frequency, volume, intensity, etc., based on how your body's currently responding to the demand you're putting on it, rather than just looking for some outside source to blanket statement tell you what the optimal amount of volume is. I think doing it this way, where you're listening to your body and progressively increasing the stimulus, is going to produce a much better stimulus for growth than some generic blanket statement of this frequency, this intensity, this volume. Start at a lower amount, and so long as you're making progress, no need to necessarily drastically increase your frequency, volume, intensity, etc. But then once that progress slows down, increase something. Should lead to more growth, and then increase something else, and as your body adapts to the changes and to the increase in intensity of demand, you're going to add more muscle, you're going to add more strength, and you got to increase again. Like it's like more of a dynamic process, in my opinion. Number 10, you can't change your shape / genetic structure. So I actually think you can, to a degree, and a lot of people, I think, will just, I would say, be a little bit pessimistic and negative, in that a common one I would hear is like, oh, I have narrow clavicles. That's your collarbone. And, if you're unfamiliar, like a really long collarbone is super conducive to having wide shoulders, because that bone being really long just simply puts your shoulder joint further out to the side. You think about in the extreme case, if you have like really long collarbones, like that shoulder joint's going to be like way out here. And regardless of how much muscle you put on, you're going to have broad shoulders. And then as you add muscle into your lats and chest and shoulders and start to fill all that out, you're going to have this sick V taper. And especially if you have a narrow bone structure in your hips. And obviously you can't change your bones, right? And so I think rather than just going, oh, I don't have really long clavicles and super broad shoulders genetically, and I don't have a super narrow waist genetically, therefore I will never have this V taper and my structure sucks, And so I'm just going to convince myself that that's not important. If you're being honest with yourself, like, to me, and like, I don't have amazing structure. I don't have extremely narrow hips, and my clavicles are actually kind of narrow, which I'm going to get into what this whole point is based on. To me, that's like a very limiting mindset, and most people probably would prefer to have broad shoulders and a more narrow waist. Like if you just detach yourself from your personal situation, how you feel about it emotionally, like, and you're given that, like a genie comes to you and is like, how do you want your body to be structured? Like, everybody's got a different preference, but I don't think there's that many dudes that are like, I want really narrow shoulders and huge hips. Like the opposite, like the pyramid fucking taper. You know, most people are going to be like, I don't want super huge hips or a super huge waist. I want that to be kind of trim, and I want my, chest and shoulders to be broad, and, my to have somewhat of a V taper. Like, I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world. And I think just because you don't have the genetic structure for that doesn't mean that you should just like dismiss it and say that that's like a stupid thing that you shouldn't work towards at all, in my opinion. And it's a hard thing to balance, to go like, okay, I'm not really blessed to have this, but I can still make improvements towards it, and I'm going to stay positive while also being realistic. So for me personally, I look at somebody like David Lade. If you're not familiar with David Lade, look him up on YouTube or Instagram. Like, probably like the craziest bone structure for this aesthetic V-taper look. Like, just incredibly wide shoulders, extremely, thin or small waist. And I think it looks amazing. I'm like, that is a sick physique. Like, that bone structure is incredible. And I look at my body and I'm like, I do not have that. Like, I do not, objectively, my collarbones are quite short. I was analyzing my physique and I'm like looking at other people's. I'm like, damn, like, I don't really got that. Shit. So I'm never going to look like that. Like, it's just physically impossible. No matter how much muscle I layer onto areas, like, I'm never going to, and my hips aren't, I would say they're kind of like in the middle. Like, they're not super wide, but they're not super narrow. They're just sort of like kind of in the midline. So it's going to be difficult for me to have like a sick V-taper like that. But does that mean that I should just abandon that and not try to develop as good of a V-taper as I can? Given that I do think that's a admirable, good physique. I'm not saying that's like the only ideal and everybody needs to look exactly like that. But if I can find a way to build up my delts and my lats and keep my body fat percentage low so that I'm holding as little meat and fluffiness around the midsection as possible to try to accentuate this kind of broad shoulder, tight waist look that I think looks the most aesthetic, I'm going to do that, while also acknowledging that I'm probably never going to have this elite type of V-taper. Like, holding both things without just going, oh, I can't have the elite V-taper, therefore that's a stupid standard that I don't want. If you genuinely, in your heart of hearts, just feel like that's not the physique you like, then that's fine. But if you're just convincing yourself it's not worthwhile just because you simply can't attain it at that level, I think that's stupid. And I think you need to be able to hold both things at the same time, even though it's less comfortable. So acknowledge what your potential is and what your limitations are, but then go to work improving it and go, well, you know what? I don't have the widest clavicles, and I can't even directly train my lats or my delts, but I'm going to find a way to get some stretch tension on my lats. I'm going to find a way to get some burn on my delts. And my shoulders, upper body width has, even in the past like year and a half, 2 years, has drastically improved. Again, it's not going to ever be like world class, but I'm much wider up top than I ever was before. And that makes me happy. And I'm glad with the progress that I've made. So I think anybody, you can improve on your structure and you can try to feature certain attributes if you really work on them, regardless of what your genetics are. But at the same time, you have limitations, and acknowledging what your kind of potential is and then trying to achieve that at its highest level is the way to go, rather than just getting too caught up in how other people have better genetic potential and then just getting rid of the whole thing. That's my take. I think just be honest with yourself and think, like, regardless of where I'm at, like, what would be the ideal? And then take a stock of what your shape and structure is and come up with a realistic approach of like how you can visualize improving it. because you can significantly improve your structure and your shape if you work on certain things and focus on growing certain areas that you want to prioritize over other areas. So that's just kind of like a mental perspective approach that I think can be tough for people because you can't determine your genetics and your shape. And so it seems like you may as well just not worry if you're not the most, like that's like David Lade's like 1 in fucking 100 million type of aesthetics, you know, and like that's just what you see on social media. It's like none of us are really gonna look like that. That's okay, you know, but you can still improve what you've got, you know, and at the end of the day, man, it's like, you don't, yeah, it's like even if you just look in the mirror and you're like, wow, my delts have really grown in my lats and like I'm looking a lot wider up top and I like that. It's like, fuck yeah, dude, good for you. And that's what counts. So it's just tough to objectively look at yourself, acknowledge that you know, it's not fair. Not everybody gets the same hand dealt. Some people get fucking pocket aces, some people get deuce 7. But still try to do the best with what you got is what I think. And that's the whole point of the journey, is to work towards something. There's a lot of times people who have the best thing don't even appreciate it because they don't have the context of knowing what it's like to not have it. So it's not actually deriving them the amount of happiness, satisfaction, and joy that you would think. If you see somebody that just has something, if you look at David Lade and you're like, wow, I would be so happy if I had that. He's not seeing it that way because he's like always, ever since he started working out, he's always looked incredibly aesthetic. So it's difficult for him to appreciate it. Whereas if you don't have it, you see that and you'd be like, wow, that change of speed going from what I look like to what he looks like would make me so happy, and I wish I was him. Right? But it's like he doesn't actually see that because he's never had the contrary comparison to realize that this is like, it's just his normal, generally speaking. Let's move on to the next point. Getting jacked won't improve your long-term dating prospects. So, first off, getting in shape, building some muscle, losing some fat is going to make you more physically attractive. Okay? I think we all agree upon that. And it's probably, not always, but probably correlated with a higher degree of self-confidence as well. And being more physically attractive and being more self-confident are both things that, generally speaking, are going to produce more dating success, just to put it roughly. Okay, and what that success looks like is up for you to determine. Some people just want to fuck. Some people want to get married. Everything else in between. All right, we're not going to get into what you should go for specifically, but simply having some more options because you become more desirable to the group of people that you're attracted to. However, long-term dating prospects, I think what makes you more attractive in the long term, beneath the surface, are characteristics that take time to develop. That simply adding muscle to your exterior does not really enhance. And so, for example, if you're basing the majority of your self-confidence on your physical appearance, you probably are not actually high in self-worth, self-esteem, and self-confidence. Because the way that you physically appear is fragile. It can change. And if that changing completely deteriorates the view of yourself, then you probably don't actually have a high degree of confidence in yourself. And I think that's what's actually most attractive and most associated with a whole host of positive characteristics that are going to make you an attractive partner for a long-term relationship. Generally speaking, most people want someone who has a lot of positive attributes. For example, is this person kind? Is this person level-headed? Is this person loving? Do they have a sense of humor? Are they intelligent? Are they empathetic? Can they understand my perspective? Or are they just ignorant and fight me on everything? Are they generally exhibiting a high degree of positive attributes? I think and those positive attributes can be defined in a multitude of different ways depending on your preference too. Certain people like different things. But generally, you're not like, wow, I want to find somebody that just sucks and is like super negative and not smart and doesn't have a sense of humor and is like super narrow-minded and is like emotionally unstable. Like, right? Like that's not what you're seeking, generally. I mean, some people like toxic kind of traits, but generally for the most part, you want a long-term relationship with somebody that has positive attributes. And the more positive attributes, the better. And those are things that the gym, I would say, is, although I think you can build some of these things through the gym, through the process of being disciplined and all this stuff, but the surface level physical appearance of having more muscle, I think, can actually be a shield from developing these other aspects. And I think a lot of people feel incomplete and insecure and exposed to who they really are and vulnerable, and they'll look to the gym to build a strong appearing physical form to substitute for their lack of internal personal development. And I have this big, impressive, muscular external appearance to overcome the lack of self-confidence, self-love, competency as a person, belief in myself, whatever it is that you're lacking. And I'm not criticizing anyone for being like this, but I believe that's a pretty strong trend. So you can overcome those limiting attributes in yourself that we all have to a degree, and there's a distribution. Some people have a lot, some people don't have too many and are crushing it, but no shade. Life is about trying to improve from where you are, not necessarily where your ended up fixed position is. But are you taking it on to try to progress and improve some from where you started? I think that's a better approach. And just simply physically changing your appearance will get you more short-term dating prospects. That's why I'm focusing on the long term, because you're physically more attractive and potentially you're going to appear as being more self-confident because you feel better about yourself, you look better. But, and on the surface, that people are going to find that more attractive, and potentially you'll have some more options. You may have some more better success, whatever that success looks like. But you're not actually developing a lot of the internal things that I think will make you attractive as a long-term partner and will ultimately give you probably more fulfillment and success over the long term. And I think actually focusing too much on building your physical appearance can stunt your ability to focus on developing and addressing these other challenges or weaknesses that you have, that we all have. And so I think having that awareness and realizing that, yes, going to the gym and trying to change my physical appearance is not a bad thing to do and is going to help me to look more attractive and probably feel a bit better about myself. But I need to also realize that that is not really a good long-term strategy for improving my overall dating prospects and my overall development as a human person. And I think being able to hold on to both things and going, I want to invest in developing my body, and hopefully you fall in love with the gym like me and you just like training regardless, but you also want the positive or the benefits of improving your muscle mass and changing your physique, while also going like, that's not going to drastically improve my life long term, although there's going to be some short-term superficial benefits. I don't want to get too caught up in those, because I want to also address these other issues to try to improve myself, to become a better person, to have more positive attributes, and to then be more attractive. And some of you may be going like, this is like a very like analytical, maybe like critical, like too logical way of looking at things. And this is not the only lens, but like put this lens on for a second. And if you hate the words and the tone of it, you can take it off later. Because there's many aspects to dating and relationships, and this is just kind of one way of looking at it. But I think it is beneficial, and I think a tendency is for people makes you feel uncomfortable, because you don't want to look at yourself naked and go like, what are my positive attributes, and like what are reasons that people would be attracted to me or not attracted to me as a person, because that potentially you're going to be forced to identify unattractive attributes of yourself that don't feel good. And then the tendency would be like, I don't like that way of looking at it, and you should just be loved for who you are. And that's I just don't think that's an accurate representation of the real world. I think potentially, maybe your family might feel that way about you, but a prospective dating person, whether it's just for hookup sex or marriage or anything in between, they have their desires in the same way that you do, and you're not seeking for somebody to just like be a horrible person and just love them because of the way they are. Obviously, you're not gonna. It never has to be perfect, and there is a degree of like just accepting someone for who they are, and they're gonna have flaws regardless. But generally, I think being open to the truth that we all would prefer to have a partner that has positive things that we like, and so since you want that same partner that you want is also going to have a bunch of positive things that they want in a partner that they like. And being willing to look at yourself and address those things, I think, is what is more predictive of improving your long-term dating prospects rather than solely just upgrading your meat vehicle to look more sexy. So, rant over. Science-based lifting content is good and bad. This is a controversial position because most people, it's either one or the other. You're in the cult or you're out of the cult. And I think trying to see the benefit while also being objective about where there's drawbacks is the best way to look at it. So I'm not a science-based lifter, but I'm also not opposed to science-based lifting content if it makes sense and seems to be valuable. And so there's a lot of useful stuff that comes out of the science because like people are just studying all these freaking details about training like ad nauseum. It's like, great, you guys keep doing that. And like occasionally interesting findings come out of that I try to factor into my training. But at the same time, I'm not fully sold on all of it. And I think generally the tendency is to overemphasize small details that aren't actually overly predictive of muscle growth. That play a smaller role. And so the context of the findings is not well represented, in my opinion, in that we're seeing, this individual new finding to be somewhat more effective at producing muscle growth, and you should lengthen partials or this exercise over that exercise. But, it's probably just a really small detail and only going to make a difference if you're obsessively consistent and train with really high intensity and have enough drive and motivation to keep pushing your training to new heights. Then if you want to sprinkle these little scientific details in, it's going to help you. And I think what ends up happening is that it emphasizes these details in substitute to doing the simple, difficult things of always showing up to your training and pushing your limits and tolerating physical discomfort for short periods of time for long-term gain. I think that's the end effect on a lot of the audience who consumes it, which to me is not the most constructive application of the information. Although it is useful and not inaccurate, unfortunately just the landslide of all of this like detail-oriented content makes it seem like these are the things that produce growth, when really the foundational factors produce most of your growth. And then these things are like things to consider to add in to optimize. And just the nature of the beast being that most of the content is these little detail optimized things makes it seem like that's the most important stuff. And I would say kind of numbs people to truly auditing their behavior to be like the most predictive things of muscle growth are actually simply just always going and just attacking my workouts with vengeance, psychotic level intensity, and then not always doing the exact same workout over and over again for months on end, finding a way to progress, add more frequency, add more volume, add more reps, add more weight, try new tempos, switch up the exercises once in a while, like things to keep upping the ante. So being able to like hold a nuanced perspective there and not just join the cult behavior of Jeff Nippert and Mike Israetel are my overlords, and anything that they say goes, and anybody who opposes them is an ignorant bro science gearhead. And on the flip side, not just being like, oh, experience-based lifting and like bro science mentality and you just train insane or remain the same and all this science is just stupid and doesn't matter. I think resisting both, cults, we'll call them, to just remain in the middle and be like, I want to prioritize my results, so I want to find the truth of what produces the most muscle gain. And what I've seen personally is that there's value in both camps, and so there's good and bad from both sides, which is just a difficult position to maintain because your tendency is to just, want to know that there's one kind of ideology and this is the way to think about it and this is the person who's got it right. The longer you resist that, or the more effectively you resist that and just try to objectively pull out information from whatever source it may be and then apply it to yourself objectively and develop your own independent thought about its effectiveness, I think will bias the best results for you. 13, one lifting style is best. Try everything, remain unattached. That's basically what I just said, is that I don't think there's one lifting style that is the best. And like the simplest example of this would be tempo. And like I've received fairly common pushback whenever I post something where I'm using fast explosive tempo, is there's at least a couple people that freak out because the science-based community primarily with content production is really in favor of slow eccentrics and slow stretch-based training. Right now, anybody who's lifted for a long time knows that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was something different. It used to be about getting the muscle as contracted as possible. Obviously, science evolves and we find new things, but a part of that is that like there's probably an overemphasis on some new findings, making it seem more potent and productive for muscle growth than it might actually be. And so within that, it becomes assumed or interpreted by a large group of people consuming this content that you have to do slow eccentrics to see growth. And in my opinion, I do both. I do really slow eccentrics. I do lengthen partials. I also do fast explosive reps. I do low rep ranges. I do high rep ranges. I do heavyweight. I do lightweight. But the tempo specifically, I guess just to stay on track and not get too ranty, is like I've just seen it be beneficial if I'm trying to progress the weight and I'm doing my like top working sets. I'm not going to go slow and controlled. I found that led to more plateaus. And I'm not going to worry about having absolute perfect form. I'm going to try to execute the movement as best I can, but I'm going to unleash the beast and participate in some horse cockery. Shout out to Eric Bugenhagen. I think that's more productive for progressing heavy weights and scaling up the amount of weight that you can move. If you want to get the craziest pump of your life, and we're going to get into later whether pump is directly, predictive of muscle growth, but regardless, if you want to get the craziest pump of your life, use a lightweight that you can get 20 to 50 reps with, and use a fast explosive tempo. If you're familiar with my content, you will have seen previous videos where I'm doing this, and people freak out and go, this is not, you have to train always slow. Why do you have to always train slow? Who's telling you that slow eccentric is the only way to train? To me, it's just, you're limiting yourself. I'm not saying that's wrong in favor of something else. I'm saying like one exact, your mind seeking for one exact best prescription is what's limiting you. And your desire for that is making you susceptible and vulnerable to somebody who wants to give you an oversimplistic one direct prescription. And that's going to, again, it's not that's going to be bad, but it's going to limit your ability to bias the best results for yourself. So fast explosive tempo, 20 to 50 reps, going down to partials at the end. So full reps, and then as you're pumping the weight out, you're trying to use reasonable form, but you're explosively pumping the weight. Then as you start to get close to failure, you start to trim that rep range shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter until you like literally can't move the weight at all, and then you drop it. And then adding drop sets to that, like 2 or 3 drops. So then drop the weight a bit, do the same thing, fast explosive tempo down to partials at the end. Like just resting 10 seconds, drop the weight one more time, bang. And then I would superset, and if you're doing this with your arms, let's say that was triceps, 3 sets of triceps. I'd rest a minute or 2, catch my breath. Same thing with biceps. First set, 20 to 50 reps, fast explosive, all out, going down to partials at the end. Drop the pin, catch your breath for 10 seconds. Another set, do it once more. That's one round. Rest another 1 to 2 minutes. You've done your triceps drop set, your biceps drop set, and then you're going to repeat that whole thing like 3 times. That's 3 or 4, 2 to 4 times. I have yet to do anything that gives me that fucking erect of a pump. It's actually absurdly insane. Like, you'll look in the mirror after and be like, what the, like, I can look like this? Like, this is not what my physique looks like. Like, this is like night and freaking day. Yeah. And slow tempo is really useful for developing the mind-muscle connection and accentuating the stretch. I would not try to accentuate a really, really deep stretch with a fast explosive tempo. I think the risk of injury is going to go up a lot. So just some nuance for the context of it, and realizing that your desire for one best way to do things is going to limit your ability to progress, to have optimal amounts of progress long term. And you got to be willing to try different things and assess what degree of validity they have in your approach. And taking on that mentality, I've seen to be really productive in continuing to find ways to grow. Next one, slow, relaxed. Oh, this is controversial. A slow, relaxed temperament leads to elite level gains. So this is just a theory or hypothesis of mine. And it's really out there. So just entertain it, okay? Something I've noticed, I'm super analytical. For those of you that don't know, I have a master's in economics. Not that that means anything crazy, but my brain is such that I analyze things at a high degree, for better or worse. Sometimes it's really useful, sometimes it's like, shut this thing off, but bro, we don't need to be breaking this stupid thing down. It doesn't matter, let's go to sleep. But the advantages of it are that I think it allows me a higher ability to pick up on certain trends and themes because I'm constantly collecting data and cataloging it and analyzing it within my brain. You wouldn't want to be inside my head. It's useful for some things. And this one is not concrete, but that's kind of where this comes from, is that I'm always looking at anything that people do that have good results. I'm analyzing everything they do and everything about them to try to pick out where is their additional value. And a trend that I've noticed is that people who seem to have some of the most incredible physiques in the world have a tendency to have a very calm, relaxed temperament. Obviously not everyone, but and if you start, I've got a few examples here. Shizzy, I did a video on him recently, like I'm pretty sure he's on gear, but regardless, he looks incredible, and a lot of people on gear don't look anything like that. And even when I think he was natural, he still had like an incredible natural physique. Obviously, there's tons of factors that go into genetics and the human body and all this stuff. So I'm not saying this is like the only thing, but if you watch him in a podcast or any of his like YouTube stuff, it doesn't mean he doesn't get riled up and excited, but generally he's like, his energy and body is like calm. And he's not kind of frantic and his shoulders aren't up here and he doesn't seem like high in anxiety. And obviously those things, like what you perceive someone being is different than what they may be feeling internally, but generally speaking, you can see that there's like a bit of a calm energy and vibe and presence. Another person that I followed is Mike Thurston. He's very calm, very slow, you know, not soft-spoken, but everything is like under control and chill, and he's chest up, relaxed. He's not getting antsy and bouncing all over the place. C-Bump, like, sometimes it's like, do you have a pulse? Like the dude is just extremely, like kind of monotone almost. Just very calm, level-headed, just like not saying too much. Like no like hyper, like the opposite of hyper. Like not tired and asleep, but just like, some people are just like that, right? That's your temperament. Michael Hearn, I know it's kind of like people don't take him that seriously because he's like, probably obviously not natural, but regardless, he's like again, some of these people like writing off their status or progress because they're probably not natural doesn't, to me, it's like, even if you're not natural, like there's so many freaking people that aren't natural that don't look anything like Michael Hearn. He's like 50 years old. It's like, that's like, even if he's taken a bunch of stuff, it's still insanely impressive. Any videos I've watched with him, whether it's YouTube or podcast, similar kind of temperament. Just kind of calm, relaxed, you know. Doesn't mean they can't get riled up, but like their default state, like, you know, you meet some people and they're just like buzzing and they're all over the place and they're frantic and they're doing all this shit. Kind of the opposite of that. Arnold, similar kind of thing. Like he's always just kind of in a calmer energy. Ronnie Coleman, say he gets all hyped up and crazy when he's training, but then if you watch YouTube videos of him and shit, he's just calm. You know, and not everybody's like that. And so my hypothesis or theory is there's something to do with recovery where any amount of stimulus for muscle growth that these types of people do gets maximized more because their body can dedicate more energy to the recovery. I'm just pulling this shit out of my ass. Okay? I don't have any proof of this. This is just a thought. That's what I think it is versus somebody who's doing a million things and their brain activity is all over the place. It's like they go train, they stimulate growth, but they can't calm down. They can't lower their nervous system. Their parasympathetic nervous system can't do what it needs to do because they're so revved up, and then their brain activity is going to dictate what they do when they're jumping all over the place. They're doing a million freaking things, and there's not enough resources energetically in the body to dedicate to recovering from the muscle growth. So it's like we did all this workout, but it's like we need to put energy and food and carbohydrate stuff to all this other activity we're doing. Whereas these other people who are still living their life, but they're doing it with just like a mellow, calm state where the body is able to dedicate energy and resources to rebuilding the muscle. Totally just a fucking theory, okay? I'm not saying that's how it works. But you let me know what you think. Comment down below. Like, obviously you can think of examples of people that are extremely hyper that are also muscular, but to me it seems like there's a really direct trend between some of the most muscular people in the world also having very calm temperaments. And, you know, it's this discussion of correlation versus causation. Like, there could be a correlation there. Like, okay, even if you think you're in favor of this, you go, oh, it seems like you're onto something there. Is it correlation, meaning that there's some other mechanism that's causing this? It's not that they are relaxed, which then leads to muscle growth. Maybe it's the reverse. They develop an extremely muscular, impressive physique, which then leads to them feeling calmer and relaxed and presenting that way to the world, for example. Or is it causal in the direction that I'm saying, in that this is just the way these people are wired and they have this type of temperament, which is more conducive to building more muscle? Don't know, but food for thought. I just thought that was an interesting idea that I've been like thinking about for quite some time. Number 15, isolating your muscles is overrated. The need to isolate the 3 different heads of your triceps, which there's a lot of content put out on, I think is absolute hogwash. And again, I think it distracts you from focusing on the factors of intensity, consistency, and some form of progression, showing up, pushing your limits, learning to train with high intensity, changing your habits and your lifestyle so that you always go and do your workouts, and then being willing to push your limits, break some rules, increase your frequency, increase your volume, do more and more to stimulate growth, which has nothing to do with isolating the lateral head versus the long head, are all going to be way more predictive of producing muscle growth. And so I think although there are these anatomical truths in that the structure of the triceps, for example, has 3 different heads, and one of the heads originates on your shoulder blade and the other ones originate on your humerus, that is an anatomical truth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that therefore it is extremely important for muscle growth to understand this truth and to directly factor that into your training, wherein you must specifically do exercises for your lateral head and specifically do exercise for your long head, and that's the key ingredient that's going to produce growth. You don't really need to direct your energy and focus to these other factors, which is kind of not directly being promoted, but indirectly that's the effect that the type of content has, is that people get distracted with trying to isolate and target these different heads, and they're not, if you just give it to somebody simply and be like, no, just pick a movement, pick 2 movements, focus, are you actually pushing that set to failure? Did you actually train with high intensity? Did you warm up properly and attack that set? Instead of going, oh, I'm just kind of meandering through the workout, but, you know, I have this information to target the lateral head and the long head, so I'm doing a good workout. I think it's just massively overstated. Obviously, you know, doing some different exercises to try to target some of your different muscles has a place. It's not zero, but generally speaking, I think it's overstated, and the body is, in that aspect, not that complicated, and your genetics are going to determine, you know, what your pec looks like. Any kind of movement that's bringing your arm across your body this way, whether it's a fly or a press, is going to stimulate the pec. And your ability to grow the top fibers versus the bottom fibers versus the inner fibers is just so massively overstated, in my opinion. And you should just focus on any type of pressing or flying variations of movements are going to stimulate the muscle. So if I train with a high enough intensity and a good amount of frequency and scale up my progression of my training over time, those are the things that are going to produce that muscle growth, and my genetics are probably going to mostly be responsible for exactly what the shape looks like. Again, I think it's one of these things that kind of is happening because there's a lot of good content to be made talking about the anatomical differences and truths of these muscles, and then portraying it as if you need to isolate them in all these different ways. And we gotta take a quick break here again. I'm really rambling on, aren't I? Memory card's running out. All right, really rambling on. Don't really have, probably just gonna have to wrap this up. So we're just running out of memory card space. And let's just go through a few more and then we'll call her a day. Your boy can really get rambling. 16, perfect slow form is overrated. I think that there's benefits, like there's kind of this general view that like a really slow, controlled, perfect range of motion, perfectly executed movement is like the best thing to do. And you know, you may be like, all right, Matt, let's hear your case for why that isn't. It's pretty easy to just sit in that camp, I think. I think doing that is really good for developing your mind-muscle connection. Really good for limiting injury. Really good for helping you as a tool to better perfect or execute certain movements. You need to go a little lighter, you need to go a little slower, you need to try to use the full range of motion and use really good form to improve your execution of the movements while developing a better mind-muscle connection and potentially taking advantage of some of these slow eccentric benefits that we keep hearing about. But if you holistically subscribe to that being the single best way to train, I think you're leaving gains on the table. I think there's also a place for pushing as heavy a weight as possible for, you know, a good amount of reps and not having picture perfect form where you're chasing progressive overload. You're chasing reps and weight. I've seen letting go of the need for perfect form and perfect mind-muscle connection to be useful for progressive overload. But I think you don't want to, I think it's, the ideal is to do both. You should have parts of your program where you're like, I'm going to execute this with perfect form, slow and controlled. I'm going to develop my mind-muscle connection. I'm going to feel the stretch. I'm going to feel the squeeze. I think you should have parts of your program where you're like, I'm going to chuck some heavy weight here. And I'm going to try to use good form still, but I'm not going to be obsessed with it being perfect. And it's going to be heavy, and I'm going to be going like ballistic, wherein I don't really feel as much of a mind-muscle connection. That's just the way it is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think if you just do that, you're leaving gains on the table because you're not developing your mind-muscle connection, and your risk of injury is going to go up because you're not balancing it out with really high-level proper execution. So again, I think this common theme of resisting seeking one specific best way to do something and adhering to like a specific ideology and being able to see the benefits of multiple approaches simultaneously is going to best bias your own personal results. Although it's more uncomfortable, although it's a bit more difficult to tread that line, building muscle and producing your true genetic potential is a difficult thing to do. And so I think that's one of the requirements on the way to doing that. 17, chasing a pump is not ideal for muscle growth. I think that chasing a pump, again, should be part of your program. But if all you do is chase a pump, if every time you go into the gym you don't factor in rep range, weight, you're not tracking anything, you just randomly are like pumping, I think you're leaving gains on the table. I think, again, it's this, like, there's value in multiple different kind of modalities or ideologies of training. I think part of your program should be very structured, and you should have consistent movements, and you should track the amount of weight and reps that you do, and you should go in there and you should try to chase additional reps and bump the weight up over time. I think you should also have, and that's better suited to the beginning of the session when you're fresh. I think chasing a pump with some more variety in your training structure at the second half or the end of the workout is very useful. And regardless, getting a massive juicy pump is fun. And so that's something I'm always going to do. But over the years, I haven't seen that high of correlation with maximum pump leading to the most muscle gain, in my experience. It doesn't seem to be like a primary driver of growth. Because getting a huge pump is more, to me, you're manipulating the rest time variable and the intensity level variable the most. So you're doing, to get a big pump, I think you need to do short rests. I think if you rest, 5, 6, 7 minutes, it's just simply you're not going to accumulate enough like damage and fatigue on the muscle to have it really swell and as much blood get in there as possible. So you're going to need to trim down the rest time. And then you're also going to want to utilize intensity techniques. So that being drop sets, that being partials, that being assisted negatives, so that you're fatiguing that muscle further and further than you normally would in just a regular set, forcing more blood to rush into the muscle. Combining that with a slower rest time, to me, are the two main ingredients for optimizing a pump. And now, do those things produce the most muscle growth over time? It's maybe one mechanism behind it, and I think it should be part of it because it's fun and there is also some use to it. But if you attach all of your allegiances to maximizing a pump, I really don't think that's, over the long term, going to produce the most gains for you. 18, naturals are morally superior to PED users. This is something I see a lot, and it's this similar type of, tribalistic energy in that, I'm a natural and we're naturals, the noble natties is like what I've heard getting thrown around here on YouTube, and I'm like, why are we more noble? If somebody chooses to use PEDs, that doesn't make them any less noble. If they use PEDs and lie about it and start promoting themselves through social media for their own financial gain, there's a discussion that maybe the degree of nobility within that pursuit is not overly high. But just generally speaking, if some individual chooses to get super motivated and into the gym and training and they want to go the not natural route, I don't look upon them as if I'm morally superior because I've remained natural. And this like energy that I'm seeing of like people putting down, like natural lifters putting down not natural lifters, I'm like, this is not constructive. Like, I think it's good to try to acknowledge and distinguish what the differences are and what happens when somebody's using things and try to like create more awareness and knowledge in that area potentially. But I don't think there's anything like it's an individual case by case scenario. And I would, if you're in that camp, I would challenge you to go, you know what, that person is using gear and they're bigger than me, but whatever. Like, that's their life and that's their pursuit and that's their choice. And from personal experience, some of the biggest, most intimidating people in the gym that are, on gear are the nicest people in the world. A lot of times they're like very sensitive, tender individuals that, again, it's not everybody, but a lot of the time that's the case. They look like these big menacing like human gorillas, and you talk to them and it's just like a really nice person, like unusually so, like more than just like a normal distribution. It's like it seems skewed. There's some like correlation there with like freaking muscle monsters being like, maybe they're more sensitive to the world to begin with, so they built themselves up physically, and inside they're just a little teddy bear. I don't know. Another crazy theory for you, but I just don't think we need that. I just don't think it's necessary, and I think it's like personal weakness from natural lifters just pointing the finger and blaming and saying you're lesser than because you're on gear, and don't do that. It's not constructive. Everybody's on their own pursuit. I'm not part of this noble natty thing. I don't think I'm more noble because I'm natural. That's my take. I think if you're lying and doing other type, like I'm going to judge you on your personal conduct and activity, not just the fact that you're choosing to take steroids because you love, for whatever reason. That's an individual person's choice. And until I've talked to them and gotten to know them and see how they treat me as an individual, I don't think I'm any more noble or morally superior to them. It depends on their characteristics and the way they live their life and how they treat people. That one decision that they're making to be not natural and inject certain compounds into themselves, I'm not judging their level of nobility or morality on that. It's going to be on way more important things of who you are as a person. And you could say that maybe shows who that person is to a degree, and maybe to a degree, but it's such a huge variety of people that are going down that path that I don't think you can jump to conclusions and say that these are people that are just morally inferior. I don't like it at all. Being muscular does not earn you more respect. I think a lot of young guys want to get big to feel better about themselves within the male hierarchy. And it's funny because I see probably, since, I'm not massive, but I'm 6'1", 210 pounds. I got 18-inch arms. Like, I'm a larger than average person, and I've got a decent amount of muscular development. And there's a contingent of like young males, particularly, that associate a degree of many factors, but let's call it respect, to me based on my physical appearance. So maybe I've just contradicted myself there. But I don't think that's actual respect. I think that that's somebody coming from a more of a lack place. And like, I've been there too, a lot of young guys. Like, you're just like, you don't really know who you are yet. You're not 100% confident, and you see this like really muscular person and you're into working out and you want to look like that. And you're like, wow, look at him. And you look at them with like this revere or whatever. But I think it's a bit of a false flag. And anybody that would look at me like that, as an example, and I've experienced it, I'm like, why? Like, I can see it, and I'm like, why are you like looking up to me just based on how I look? Like, before you even get to know me, you're like, wow, look at this guy. And like, again, I'm not the hugest dude that everybody's looking up to, but there's been instances where there's like I was at university the past couple of years doing my master's, and I'm 31, 32, and most of the guys there are 19 or 20 years old. And I'm in the gym and they're in the gym, and I've been at it for a longer time, and I'm much more built up than they are. And a lot of times, young guys, I could tell the way that they were viewing me was like that. And it's interesting to experience, and to me, it just showed, like, I was like, you shouldn't be associating any, like, degree of respect and value just based on my physical appearance. It should be based on what my character is as a person. That's what will determine your real degree of respect that you get from the world. It's a superficial thing that people who are coming from a lacking place are going to associate a false flag of respect to you. And so I don't think it actually earns you concrete, long-term, meaningful respect from your peers or the culture or society around you. I think that you develop that through your actions and through a display of high character attributes. And so if you want to build muscle to try to be more respected, I think it's another one of those false flag things, similar to having better long-term dating prospects. Yes, superficially, there's going to seem to be a different regard for you as a person because you're physically more imposing. But over the long term in your life, you're probably not going to get the thing that you want if you think just getting bigger is going to earn me respect from the other males around me. Number 20, overall resisting getting attached and try to think, act independently equals the best results. I've highlighted this over and over again in a lot of these instances. I think one of the main dynamics within your mind when you're going about your journey for muscle growth is to resist the desire to form an allegiance to any one information source, ideology, modality of training, and to try to remain neutral and independent and extract the value from any individual person or school or content or whatever, and assess how that's going to help you to achieve better results, apply it to yourself, objectively step back, and form your own independent thoughts about what's working. I think that is the single most important, like, perspective mental thing to apply to your training from like a philosophical training philosophy approach, which is a difficult thing to do, but I think in the long term it will yield more benefits for you if you can pull it off. Maybe we're going to finish here. I'm kind of trying to speed it up. We still got a little time on the camera. Last one. Alcohol does not kill gains. We got 3 minutes left on the timer. We made it. 22 freaking points, and oh my god, did I ramble on forever. Alcohol in moderation does not kill your gains. The shots of whiskey I've been doing, I mean, I have a shot, That's an ounce, 1 drink of alcohol. Some of them are like less, I'm gonna be honest. I just pour like a little tickle in there. It's probably like half a shot just to give me a little zap. Drinking alcohol in mass amounts 100% is gonna massively impact your ability to add large amounts of muscle. You can still be fit, you can still be in shape, you can probably still make some progress, but it's gonna seriously impede your recovery. Alcohol in moderation, having 1 drink, you know, here or there, 2 drinks maximum, a couple times a week, you know, have a beer on Fridays, have a shot of whiskey on a Tuesday night. That's not gonna kill your gains at all. If anything, you should be factoring in the additional calories, and it could add some additional body fat and reduce your leanness level, but in my opinion, you know, alcohol in moderation is not going to impede any of your results. So you can still have some fun and drink a little, but if you drink enough to get hungover and feel it the next day, then that's probably affecting your recovery and your ability to train hard, depleting your body of nutrients. It's not going to be ideal if you're trying to prioritize muscle growth. But if you want to have a beer once in a while or a shot of something here and there to celebrate, like, it's moderation, in my opinion. And I'm like 32, I get horrible hangover. I haven't been drunk in years. But, you know, I firmly believe that, you know, 1 or 2 beers a week is not affecting my ability to build muscle. It's just adding some extra calories in. So if, you know, you're in this, I'm really promoting, like, if you want the best results, like, you need to be hardcore with your training and your mentality. You can't be comfortable and stuff. But I also think, like, you can live your life still. And yeah, alcohol is a good example where you can have a couple drinks. It's not going to kill your gains. But the reality is it's adding some extra calories, and you may need to cut that out if you're trying to get down to a certain leanness level. You may not be able to afford yourself 2 drinks a week. Depends. But, you know, it's not a little bit of alcohol in the system's not going to kill you. So that's it. You made it to the end. If you did, holy freaking smokes. Thanks for tagging along. If you like this kind of video that's longer and just a gigantic ramble fest, you know, comment, let me know what's up. As always, if you want to do the ARM program, the link is in the description. It's not, you know, critical. It's not some miracle thing, but, you know, if you're looking for more structure and you want to follow the specific routines and work through all these video-based lessons and courses in a more structured way, you can check that out. If you want to support your boy and prioritize and financially invest in your ARM growth, might help you keep more accountable. I don't know. Either way, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Peace.